2 or 3 years ago, I was still very active in a 9th District Move-On Council that was centered around Jan Schakowsky's district. And I came here with the mission of trying to link up with other groups. We were trying to see other progressive groups that might work with us, because I was under the impression, as others were, that we often work in parallel, but we don't coordinate. And so we had cases where we would be doing one rally and a friendly organization would be doing another one nearby, and we should have been doing them together. Anyway, I ended up looking for some other progressive group in my area, and through a friend, I began to go to meetings at an organization called Northside Power. It was a very different kind of group from what I had experienced in working with Move On, and I had worked with Move On for quite a few elections. Northside Power is a kind of a affiliate with a 501c3 organization called A Just Harvest. It's based in Rogers Park. A Just Harvest has been in existence for about 25 years. It's an anti-hunger group, and it runs a soup kitchen and food pantry 365 days a year. It may be the largest independent soup kitchen in the city, and they feed hundreds of people every day. A few years ago, and long before I was involved with them, somebody on their board came to the board and said, look, we have all these people who come here. These are many of them very poor, but certainly people who have needs for decent diet, have poor housing, jobs, many different needs, and we're feeding them. But these people could be involved in the struggle for the objectives that A Just Harvest favored. And they apparently, board agreed to hire an organizer and provide some staff, and that's how Northside Power was created about 5 or 6 years ago. The goal of Northside Power was to reach out to these people in the neighborhood, and many of them who frequent the soup kitchen, and get them involved in various kinds of activities where they could work for to solve the problems that they face, to have their needs met. So one of the things that Northside Power is particularly interested in is developing leadership among the people it works with. In other words, we have policy objectives, and I'll talk a little bit about those, but our goal also is to get people mobilized in such a way that they begin to feel they can be efficacious in the political process, or in using measures that are maybe outside some of the, say, electoral process, but they can actually work for their own objectives. One of the things that I learned is that there's a kind of fraternity or sorority of community organizers all over Chicago. There are people all over this country, many of whom worked in the organization that Saul Alinsky founded many years ago. But there is a kind of a profession of community organizer, and a lot of these people know each other. They work together in various organizations, and that's how Northside Power became a member of a coalition called IRON. The name, which is in transition, is literally Illinois-Indiana Regional Organizing Network. It includes several organizations. There's a group on the south side called SOUL. There's a group in northwest Indiana. There's Northside Power, and I think there's one other group. Each of these groups, in a sense, is a coalition of organizations who come together periodically. Well, when the last, I guess it really started in maybe even in the summer, when the what was it, the Gang of Six or whatever was supposedly getting together to figure out how a deal could be struck to reduce our deficit, and our Senator Durbin was, making some statements which made it appear that he was not totally firm on backing a position such as no cuts for Social Security, no cuts for Medicare, no cuts for Medicaid, no cuts to other kinds of programs that make up the social safety net. Clearly, he was in favor of these programs, but he also was indicating that he felt there was some need to compromise and there might have to be adjustments in some of those programs to save some of the costs. And so Iron, through its constituent organizations, decided that we had to really go after Durbin. Durbin was our representative in Congress. He was involved with this negotiation. He's a close associate of Obama's. So we felt, all right, not only does he have an obligation to represent us, but he's also the obvious person in Illinois for us to be trying to pressure. So we began to send messages. We tried to talk with him, and eventually the group decided to do an action down at the Federal Plaza where his office was, and to actually try to see if they could get him to speak directly with representatives of Iron. And we had the first rally where we went down, and this came after repeated attempts to really converse with him. Really didn't seem to be eager to engage in an open kind of conversation. We brought a big group down there. It wasn't just Iron. There were other groups involved. One of the groups that particularly been working with us, the Jane Addams Senior Caucus. I think there were SEIU people there. And a number of people, mostly I think from the Iron groups, actually went into the building. We had gone into the building to do our demonstration in the federal building. And they weren't exactly ready for us. A number of people went up to Durbin's office, got a very frosty reception. They called the marshals right away, and some of them were arrested. And a number of other people stayed in the building after we were told we would be arrested if we didn't leave. Most of us left, but a group which had already volunteered that they would take an arrest, stayed in, and they were arrested. The use of civil disobedience in this case was an attempt to kind of impress upon Durbin and others that we were really serious, and the hope was that we would get more coverage from the media in doing this. And our basic position was no cuts to those measures, no continuation of the Bush tax cuts for those who make more than $250,000, couples or individuals who earn more or have income of more than $250,000 a year. And those were the major really, and the third point, which wasn't really developed well, find other sources of revenue. There are other ways, in addition to tax increases, other ways to raise revenue that could be used so that the cuts needn't fall on those people who can least afford to have those programs cut back. There wasn't a lot of, as I recall, Harry, you can fill me in on this, there wasn't a lot of press. We really, despite a pretty well-organized effort getting in there, bringing down several hundred people, the media just ignored us. Maybe one camera, but yeah, they weren't interested, and we really weren't sure what the effect of this was. It did get a significant number of people riled up, beginning to realize that Durbin wasn't being very firm on these matters, and that was a problem. So that was our first effort to get the issue, use the issue as a way of mobilizing our constituents and also we hoped reaching maybe a larger public, people would realize that Durbin really wasn't protecting us. He wasn't doing the job that we wanted him to do. A few weeks later, I forget the exact date, we went back again because, again, there was no clear sign that Durbin wasn't going to make concessions. He was starting to talk about, well, maybe we need to raise the age at which people become eligible for Social Security. Maybe we have to, there were a couple of other, the cost of living adjustment might have to be a change. These were the kinds of things he was saying. We need to put these on the table to show that we're willing to negotiate. And we were worried about that. So we had a second rally down there. And again, this time, the idea that somebody came up with, and I don't remember whose idea it was, they were going to do, during the week, we had a soup line down at Federal Plaza for about an hour every noon from Monday through Thursday, where people could line up and get free soup. And the idea was, this is what it could look like if all these cuts that the Gang of Six seemed to think would be good, if these kind of cuts went in, this is what we'll be looking at, something like the Depression of the 30s. The second idea was to bring down these little temporary structures, they really were just boxes, and create something like a Durbinville, like a Hooverville. And again, this was an idea to catch the media's attention and say, people will be living in shacks. People actually have already lost their housing, but people will be living in shacks if these kinds of cuts are allowed to go through. That seemed to strike something of a chord with the media, and we actually got quite a bit of attention to that. By chance, some national photographic agency took a picture of a young person in one of these boxes with the sign about Durbinville, and it went all over the country, and we actually got some attention. So the feeling was that the tactic may have at least gotten some media attention, and it did seem, and I won't take credit, I don't say we would take credit, but Durbin started to say, well, no cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. He seemed to have backed off a little bit. He was a little firmer on where he stood, and that may have been due to the fact that we had this coalition, not our group alone, had made this issue more salient. It was getting into the media, and I think he still wanted to look to his Illinois constituency as if he's a very firm defender of these kinds of programs. We all know that these things are going to come up again. That was probably maybe the biggest failing of the deal, was that it really kicked some of the big problems down the road, particularly the debt ceiling thing, which is, again, one of these artificial devices to try to put pressure on our Congress. But it's a little bit like the fiscal cliff. Exceeding the debt ceiling is not the end of the American economy and American society as we know it. But people are supposed to be frightened by these kinds of things and feel like, oh, well, we have to make sacrifices. We'll all have to do that. What we've tried to focus on in Iron and Northside Power, and this is where I'm looking for your input, and maybe we can work on this, there have to be other sources of revenue. And one of the, and not original to us by any means, one of the major proposals is this bill by, I think Keith Ellison has introduced it, called the Robin Hood tax. It's basically a very small tax on stock transfers, stock transactions, and it has a number of very positive features. It could generate a lot of revenue. It is argued by its proponents that it will not discourage, it's not going to end Wall Street places are not, the Wall Street's not going to go out of business because of this. But on the other hand, it may actually have a calming effect on some of these, what's sometimes referred to as churning, where people are selling stocks, day after day after day to make very little marginal gains, and really no rational economic reason for doing that, may actually slow that kind of thing down. Our problem, or the way I look at this, is that how do you make an issue like other forms of revenue something that the average citizen, the person, let's say, who reads the newspaper, can understand the rationale for it, what it would do, why it's better than other measures. That's something we're always trying to think about, because even in this discussion about the Obama Health Care Act, the average person is totally at a loss to even really understand what it is and who's paying for it ultimately, and why it's better. I mean, there are a few features that are pretty obvious, like keeping people who have pre-existing conditions can't be excluded. But for the most part, it's a very complex system, and it's very hard to convince people. If on balance, it's an improvement. I mean, this is, I think, not the only reason, but an interesting reason why the single payer system would be preferable, not only because it'd be efficient, but people could understand what it actually does. Whether that will help get more people behind that, I don't know. But again, each of these areas presents problems in trying to reach a broader public than us. We're a relatively small segment of the politically active people. I mean, say voters who follow these issues, but a lot of people don't. And you have to get something that dramatizes these issues so they can begin to see what's really at stake. Now, one thing that we did, and I just want to talk about this, and then I'll take questions. Iron supported a bill. It was called Senate Bill 282, the Corporate Tax Disclosure and Accountability Act. I think that was one of the titles. Senator Cullerton introduced this bill in the Senate in the fall. It was originally brought in, but it was brought to the floor in the fall, and he got a majority, largely Democrats, to pass it. This bill would require publicly listed corporations that do business in Illinois to make public, with a 2-year lag, what income tax they were paying to the state and what exemptions and special tax considerations they use in figuring out what they owe the state. That's a fairly simplified version of it. But when we got it, we helped get it through the Senate. We were down in Springfield. We lobbied there. Cullerton had a press conference. Our people spoke there. The Senate passed it, so it went to the House. And Barbara Flynn Curry was the lead sponsor. And we were able to get it out to the House Revenue Committee, where it died in the end of the lame duck session because 2 Democrats wouldn't vote for it, one of whom was a Democratic leader, Frank Motino. And the Chamber of Commerce came out very strongly against this bill and fought it, and the people who testified at the hearing were all business-related clients of the Chamber, basically saying that this isn't necessary, it would violate confidentiality, and so forth. Curry responded quite well to a lot of these criticisms, but the thing that was, for me, most interesting was when we had the press conference, Cullerton said when Sears, they were negotiating with Sears. Sears was threatening to leave, if you remember. Sears was threatening to move from the state. So I don't know who was actually in on this conversation, but Cullerton was, and he said, We said to Sears, we'll give you a rebate on your income taxes. And the Sears representative said to them, we don't pay any income taxes now, so your rebate offer really isn't going to help us. And they were both, I think, shocked and embarrassed. And he said, and Curry said too, we don't really know who pays the taxes. Some do, but according to the director of revenue, Brian Hamer, almost two-thirds of these corporations don't pay any taxes. So you've had over the years, and it probably has been a long-term process, these are big corporations we're talking about. The publicly listed corporations are like 1.5% of all the corporations in Illinois. These corporations have been using these various exemptions to avoid paying possibly mammoth taxes to the state. And so this was seen as a first step. This is not the end result, but we wanted to make people aware that, and this is again trying to think of what is an issue that gets people excited, fair taxation. I mean, everybody who pays income tax and sales tax in the state knows what that's about. And then you have these big corporations apparently avoiding a lot of these taxes. So where's the fairness? And that's, I think, an issue. In other words, big corporations, they have power, they get the breaks. Ordinary people have to pay. Do you have a question?